4-0, they lose to the Netherlands after shipping 4 in the second half in the first friendly. Everyone's wondering what the French will then do to Canada, but credit Jesse Marsh and his staff. He does not overthink it too much, makes some subliminal slight tweaks to the team, only makes the change in goal, and Maxime Crépeau, one of the best players on the park. So with that results, the two-time World Cup winners goalless in Bordeaux. Ollie has already given his thoughts on social media about they keep rankings of the match. Maybe we'll touch on those, but we're also thinking about Copa America that begins next week and the high that this team is going in on. So let's get some instant takeaways. Let's start with you, Oliver Platt.
Well, the big takeaway for me was that that result yesterday and that performance yesterday is just a massive lift ahead of a major tournament for a team that really needed it. Like since the World Cup, we don't need to recap it all, but it's been obviously a really up and down periods with John Herdman departing, the disappointment in the Nations League final, the disappointment of failing to qualify at the first time of asking for this Copa America and having to go the long route with that Jamaica defeat. So it's not all been plain sailing, and there's been a lot of kind of negative coverage, and the feeling around the team has definitely changed, I think, since Qatar. And I think that result just goes a long way towards restoring some of that confidence and belief in this team, and also confidence and belief in Jesse Marsh as he takes charge of this team and starts to assert himself. So really, really significant in that regards. In terms of what it tells us about, how this team is going to perform later this month, I still think it's hard to tell. It's too early to say. I think it would have been a mistake to massively overreact to the 4-0 defeat to the Netherlands. And I think it's probably a mistake to overreact the other way to this result against France, as good as the performance was and as great as that result is. So it's still a little bit of wait and see for me. But what I think you can say, just based on these two games, is there were good adjustments from the first game to the second one from Jesse Marsh. And also some of the things that maybe you wondered about how that transition would look, how his style of play would look with this team. At Leeds, I think he played with quite a narrow team at times, and you wondered if that would suit Canada, given the strengths are in the wide areas. Obviously, the pressing has been a big talking point. Can they do that? Can they sustain that? I think you saw that he's willing to be adaptable to this team. This team did play with width, did get Davies and Buchanan on the ball in wide areas. It was a team that was happy to sit in a mid-block at times and didn't just want to press all over the pitch. So there's adjustments being made there, I think, to how he's played in the past versus maybe what suits the players he has at his disposal now, which is encouraging to see. So overall, I think a positive window, certainly off the back of Sunday's result, but still going to find out more, I think, in these big competitive games to come later this month.
Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be repeated. It needs to be able to be replicated on a regular basis for this team to go where they need to be. But my first impressions more come from the vibe put off around the team. Dealing with Jesse Marsh through the window, he's as advertised. He's a very impressive individual. He's engaging. I think that he's fully committed to this group. And for me, on that end of things, everything sounded good and sounded right. The words of Davies and Eustachio as captain, the way that he managed that situation, bringing Alphonso Davies into this leadership group to take on a bigger role. Some of his decisions on the field made sense. He stayed true to the way that he wants to play in this 4-2-2-2, brand new center back pairing. He rode with them and he got them right. Playing Davies at left back was a big call. He stuck with his guns despite a difficult second half. And it seems like this team were willing to work and run and do all the little things required in order to sacrifice to get the most out of one another. I think it was really sobering the way that they finished the game in Rotterdam against the Netherlands. The changes that he made off the bench certainly contributed to what played out, but the response was critical, and they did that in the right way on short rest. So you package that all up, and that's something that I think now you want to see, and not just you, me, but the country wants to see more of. And thankfully, in just 10 days from now, we're going to get to see a whole lot more of it in a very competitive group, in Group A at Copa America. So I'm generally, and Ollie and I and Adam, we talked about this on the show. I think that we approach this hiring with a little bit of being a little bit skeptical. Not about the team or the players or anything like that. It's just whether Marsh's style would be applicable to this team and this group at this time. And by, just the small sample size of the French game, I think it does give you reason to believe that it can happen. So we'll see over the longer term.
And like any new hiring, the stakeholders always are curious and rooting for the best, but until you see it, you just don't know,
Mm.
Gareth. It's a very valid point. And from it, and you just teased it, of course, that Canada is going to get even more intense competition and arguably a step up in quality in just a couple of weeks. But while that result, if there is one, would change the answer to this question, we're not there yet. So let me ask you, Gareth Wheeler, that game against France, whether you want to say the performance or the result, was the most impressive for Canada's men's national team since blank.
Well, the one that's going to come to mind for most people is going to be Belgium at the World Cup, because they were a second ranked team in that tournament, and Canada looked to be the better side for large portions of that game. Unfortunately, Canada didn't win that game, and that's inevitably what the big takeaway is that they went on and lost. In the Confederations Cup in 2001, Canada drew Brazil at that time 0-0. This one had a lot of the hallmarks, that Brazil team, a little bit more dominant. But with all due respect, the Confederations Cup, a little bit of a warm-up tournament. Brazil rotated a little bit. This French side's preparing for a tournament and needed to be sharp heading into Euros, where they are joint favorites. But that team that day, in terms of Forrest, DeVos, McKenna, Stalteri, Dasovic, Brennan, Pescasolido, like, they had a really good team, and that was a team that just recently had that Gold Cup success as well, winning that tournament. So I'd have to go back. What's that? 23 years ago from now, to have a true comparable playing a top nation on the top of their game, and a performance like that, and coming away with a result. So yeah, it's been a long time coming, and it's not all the players' fault. Canada just hasn't had very many games like this as reference points. Like, you can go on and beat the US or Mexico or teams within CONCACAF, that's fine. But Brazil, France, these are top nations that are among the favorites in any tournament that they play in.
Oliver Platt.
Best performance since Belgium. I think that one's pretty easy. And in terms of result, I'm not going to go as far back. I will go to the World Cup qualifiers for Qatar, because I think there was one win that was the most unlikely result that Canada got in that run, which was the win over the US in Hamilton. And I understand that the US, aren't a comparable team at this point to what Canada faced on Sunday. So there's obviously a big gap there, but you just look at the circumstances in which Canada won that game. Like, they had 4 starters in that game that started yesterday against France. No Davies, no Eustachio, Osorio and Kay, the game was played in January. They were in their MLS off seasons. That was the central midfields. And you compare it to the US lineup, and it's actually a pretty similar lineup to the one they're still turning out right now, going into this Copa America with some big players in it. So that one for me would be the one I'd go back to in terms of most impressive result.
And I go right back to you. Now we focus a little bit more on the minutia and specific individuals, Ollie. Whose stock rose the most for you as Canada's top performer in this window?
Kone. Like, what more can you say about this kid? Like, he continues to rise to every challenge that's put in front of him. He continues to grow. Still a young player, and you just wonder what the ceiling is for this kid, because he seems like he's still got steps forward in front of him. So I thought he was fantastic up against Kante and Camavinga, world-class central midfields. Didn't look out of place. He's got so much confidence and ease on the ball, which is obviously the thing that stands out about him. But I think he's growing in all aspects of his game, physically, in terms of his footballing intelligence as well. It's all coming along really, really quickly. So, I still think that's a bit of a question mark in central midfield for Canada in terms of how they set up in that area. But I think you saw 2 things in that France game. One is that Kone is getting better and better, and maybe making that a bit less of a problem than it might have been in the past. And then also, I thought it was interesting how Jesse Marsh set them up. It was almost like out of possession, Tejon stayed with the front 2 and Miller was with the midfield 2, and it kind of became a 4-3-3, which gave them effectively like a third midfielder, an extra body in the middle of the park. And I think that was quite effective. So maybe something to, that Jesse Marsh sees as a potential solution in that central midfield area.
Wheels.
Yeah, they're lacking some depth in that area. I'll always spin back to what John Herdman told me when he called Ismail Kone into his first camp, and it was the final window of qualifying. He said that Atiba Hutchinson and other players were like, "Who is this kid?" And they came to it. There was a consensus that this guy could be a $60 million player someday. And I look at him; he's only 21. He's like just 2 years and change into his professional career. Like,
Yeah.
how high is the ceiling for him? Like, I know Davies and David are special, but this guy has all the hallmarks of being an absolute top player as well. I'll go in a little bit of a different direction. I'll slot back to the center backs. It's very difficult to separate them from one another because I think Moise Bombito and Derek Cornelius both answered the many questions about what that center back pairing would look like. When you looked at the squad that Jesse Marsh named, you're like, okay, who's going to start here at center back? And he named a brand new pairing. Bombito came into this camp with 3 Canada starts, 4 games at the Gold Cup last summer, where he played central midfield. Derek Cornelius simply hasn't played much football whatsoever. Obviously, has pedigree coming through the Canadian system. Was a 2018 Canadian Youth Player of the Year, but lost his way. Couldn't catch on with the Whitecaps. Went to Greece, provided them that outlet in Europe, and has hit the ground running at Malmo and just continues to exceed expectations. His debut was all the way back in 2018, but he played just 1 World Cup qualifying game, and that was in a 0-0 against Jamaica, and only made 4 starts before this window since, including that 3-2 home game against Jamaica, where it was a little bit of a disaster across the back line with the 2 left-footed center backs. Cornelius was outstanding. Like, both these players, decent on the ball, size, speed, the way they read the game and were physically committed. I don't think that they did much wrong. Even in the 4-0, I just look at the goals and they weren't on the center back. So if I could share them, Adam, share that title for the most impressive between Bombito and Cornelius, I would do that. And it provides a potential solution for what looked to be a potentially problematic position. That's a big step forward for Marsh in this team.
I'm going to offer an honorable mention, and it's probably
Go
because
for
I
it.
spend a lot of time with goalkeepers lately in the commentary booth. And Gareth, you know as well as I do, it's tight confines in there, so you pick up some
Tight.
things by osmosis. So a shout to Maxime Crepeau, because when Dane Sinclair got the start against the Dutch, I think a lot of supporters were excited to see what it would look like. Many have been wondering when Dane would get his chance again. But not to say that Canada lost that match because of the play of St. Clair, but you can absolutely argue that Canada got their draw in large part due to the play of Maxime Crepeau when he was given the gloves. So I think his stock absolutely shot up for how well he handled the numerous French threats. I got to split up the next 2 questions. Please
Really
do.
quickly though, let's give a shout out to Quebec, because Bombito,
Quebec.
Kone, Crepeau, the Saint Laurent connection with Bombito and Kone. And
Yeah.
Bombito went on. He played in Council Bluffs, Iowa, at a community college before spending a year at New Hampshire University. This just shows you that market, so much more work needs to be done and more professional opportunities, because the talent is there. It is undeniable. So I like how all 3 picked players, coming from the province of Quebec, because I mean, it is just such a underutilized resource for me that we need to do much more within that province.
Shout out to Mrs. Jenkins, proudly born in Montreal, representing Quebec here on the show here. Looking forward to seeing more Quebecers
Dad
do
was a
good
Montrealer.
things for this national team. See, I knew there was something about you I liked, and it wasn't just the plaid. Ollie, I'm going to give you one question, then I'm going to give Gareth one more, and we have to move on. For you, I'm going to ask you what Jesse Marsh's most pressing lineup decision is heading into Copa America.
Well, I actually think it's been flipped on its head a little bit. Like we were all talking about centre back and central midfield and goalkeeper. Like I'd be surprised at this point if it's not Crepeau, if it's not Bombito and Cornelius, if it's not Eustaquio and Kone. Maybe they'll add another one into that group. But I think more of the questions are now further forwards. And I think probably you have to ask yourself, well, if you want to make a change to the lineup, who exactly are you bringing in? Because that's probably the biggest question with Canada right now is the depth and the options beyond the first 11 or the outfield 10 that Jesse Marsh selected. So Richie Laryea is going to be in contention if he can get fit. Maybe up front, could Ike Ugbo or Theo Bair start to challenge for a spot based on this window? Maybe not. He went with David and Laren in both games, but I think that's probably where more of the decisions are now than at the back, which coming out of these 2 friendlies looks pretty set, to be honest.
And Gareth, to add in for you in the last question and the last word to you, is there anyone you think that might be able to be added or should be added to the upcoming Copa roster?
First of all, that should be your starting 11. The one against France should be the starting 11 against Argentina. Unless there's an injury there, like you don't change that. I think there's something there. I think that the question's more kind of Ollie touched on it, revolves around the players who may come on and play a role in those games. The depth, is it there quite there yet for this Canada side? I'm not sure. We'll see how that plays out. For me, Ali Ahmed is the obvious name because I think stylistically speaking, he's a player that can play this style of football: athletic, rangy, quick, could going both ways, versatile. I think that he's a player that should get called in. And it was unanimous between Christian Jack and Jordan Wilson on match night. Jason Russell Rowe seems to be a player that should make his way back into the setup as well.
2 words, Jason Russell Rowe.
2 words. That was really, really funny.
Jason Russell Rowe.
Just 2 words. It had to go with the guy with 3 names.
Can I put a little wild card in there very quickly?
Yeah, you may. Yes, you may.
I'm not saying this player is going to come in and start, but if we're talking about the central midfield area, a player who I think has always played well for Canada when given the chance and is playing every week in MLS right now, albeit not for a great side, Liam Fraser is getting back into the form that maybe we hoped he could get into a couple of years ago.
By the way, scored a great goal on the weekend.
Scored on the
If
weekend.
you saw it. It was really well hit. Good shout with Liam because maybe provides a little bit more cover if required. So in certain areas. Yeah. So good shout, Ollie. I'll subscribe to that too.
I have a feeling that a little extra cover against Argentina might not be the worst thing in the world, but yes, plenty.
The other teams in the groups
to decide.
Don't underestimate Chile or Peru.
Chile is fantastic.
Teams can play. So,
and I've already said the thing that I'm most excited about with the Peruvian match is the loser has to change their flag. It's as simple as that. We both can't keep it after that game is played. We'll continue to monitor this story and this team as we get closer with an announcement on the near horizon on our coverage of Copa America and what that will entail. We're very excited about it, but stay tuned. More to come on that. At random, I'm going to assign the gentlemen some Copa America questions presented by Tony Bet. Let's start with the top scorer, Oliver Platt. Messi for the Golden Boot, plus 291. Vinny Jr. plus 403. Darwin Núñez at plus 547.
There's going to be a theme to a couple of my picks, I think. I'm going to go with Darwin Núñez, who has been a bit of a monster for Uruguay in recent games, and I really like that team. So give me Núñez at plus 547, bit more value than the other two.
Gareth?
I will go one of 2 players. I'll pick one for Argentina and one for Brazil. Julian Alvarez at plus 719. I mean, he's the focal point of this team. I know Lautaro Martinez is in the team, but Alvarez, the connection that he has with Messi and company, I think there's more value to him. And Rodrigo, another Real Madrid player, plus 1,200. He actually had a better XG than Vinicius Jr. over the course of the Champions League run. So we'll see if he can replicate that for Brazil this summer.
Gareth, Canada to advance from the group. Yes is plus 252. No, minus 334.
I can't go minus 3. What is it? 354?
334. It's pretty heavy.
I would take a punt, a half unit play on Canada to advance.
Yeah.
How about that?
Give me the yes. Plus 252.
Can't bet on no. There's no juice there.